Hello, I'm David Hume. History is all around, as is evidenced by this memorial to General Sir James Steele on Ballycarry's Amenity Green, telling the story of a very distinguished army officer who was born and grew up in this community. But what is history? History is objects, it's books, photographs, memories. And in this short film, we want to explore objects that people have and the story that those objects actually tell and the memories that they provoke. One of the famous figures from Ballycarry history was James Orr, the weaver poet, and he's regarded as Ulster's Robert Burns. He's an Ulster Scots poet. He is just an amazing figure. He never attended school a day in his life. He was educated solely at home, and yet he becomes a really amazing poet. A radical. During the 1790s, he was involved in the 1798 rebellion, and he always stayed quite radical. Even some of his poems afterwards have radical resonance to them. And although he's likened to Robert Burns, Burns sort of lost a lot of that radicalism because he got patronage, whereas Orr didn't really get patronage that took his radicalism away. But he writes a lot of poems about the local area, a lot of poems about Ballycarry, and songs and his involvements, and songs for the Masonic Lodge and so on for events effectively. He's born in 1770, dies in 1816. Still remembered then in the 19th century in the community, and his title Bard of Ballycarry carries forward a long time. And by the early part of the 20th century then, there are a few moves to revive the idea of Orr's work and bring it to new audiences effectively. His original poetry was published in early 1800s and then after his death. But by 1922 there's an account in the village of a concert being held which focuses on Orr's works, and then a committee is set up to try and reprint some of those works then. So this book is the fruit of that committee, and this was published in 1935, this volume. It's a fantastic resource again because it actually uses the subscription list from 1804 to tell you who the subscribers were for his original poetry in 1804, and that's included in the volume, and then a lot of the poems are here too, the two volumes effectively of poetry. So in 1935, a small committee including the poets William Caldwell and William Hume were both involved in getting this book reprinted, getting it published, and you'll still find a few of them, not too many of them, but you'll still find a few of them around, and a lot of houses in Ballycarry will still have these from those days being passed back on down. John Hewitt, the poet, said that at least one of Orr's poems was better than anything Burns had written as poetry, and it was the Irish Cotter's Death and Burial. John Hewitt sort of revived the interest in the weaver poets, and they were, at that stage, they had been so much forgotten that when he was producing his PhD on the Ulster Weaver poets, there was a doubt that they had actually existed, and that he had made it all up, so he had to produce his evidence to prove these poets actually existed. Nobody has that view nowadays because there's so much more known about them. But I like his elegy on Robert Burns. He never met Robert Burns. Some of the Ulster Weaver poets did go across to Ayrshire and meet Robert Burns, with no evidence that Orr did that, although one of his poems is about being in Scotland, so he certainly travelled to Scotland. But this is about the death of Burns. It's just called Elegy, on the death of Mr. Robert Burns, the Ayrshire poet. The lift begot a storm to brew, the cloudy sun was vexed and dark, a forked flash came skelton through, before a hawk that chased a lark. Then, as I ran to reach a booth, I met a swain and asked, "What news?" When thus he mourned the far-famed youth, what fills the dark and narrow house. "Sad news, he's gone, wi' baith amused, the man o' taste, and taught the rood. Was works hae been more read and roosed than ony save the word o' God. Him genius fostered on our lap, and for his fa and fancy mourns, Dumfries might weel steek every shop, and send our tribes to Barry Burns." To me, it's a fantastic poem, And it's also something that we can get to hear the language of the people in Orr's time, the Ulster Scots that they spoke, because a lot of Ulster Scots words there, and that's just a natural conversation that people would have had, and a lot of that, of course, was lost over the years. So this little volume really is a real treasure.